Hey everyone, welcome to the Libram Society, a literary live show. I am your co-host Jason,
And I'm Arlen.
and we would like to welcome you to episode number 7, another deep dive into Malazan, Book of the Fallen, Gardens of the Moon, Book 2, Darujhistan. All right, you got anything else for the forward today, Arlen?
Anything for the forward today? Aside from apologizing that we couldn't make it last week because I was having issues and Hobbs ended up deciding, as was totally reasonable, that doing it by himself was not a great idea. So we missed last week, but we are back. We are covering the Malazan Book of the Fallen. We are covering Book 2, Darujhistan, as much as we can get through. Hobbs and I were talking before the show about we probably were over ambitious with our plan, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, that was a good call. My apologies. I did the first episode by I could have done it, but it's rough times. I don't know if
Yeah.
there's a conjunction of the powers today or in the last week or so, but things have been weird in the world. I don't know. What do would you agree or no?
It's been a little weird for me, certainly.
Yeah, definitely
Yeah.
just work, play, everything. But
Yep.
we don't have a ton of time. So I'll flip up the book just again. This is my version that I'm using. Oh, did you get a new one? Oh,
No, this is my Kindle.
your Kindle. But you have one of these as well, right?
Yeah, I've got one of all of them. I don't read it on there because it's heavier.
I see. I see. I would like to thank everyone for stopping by, and we like to have a raucous crowd here. This is a
Yeah.
literary live show. Get involved, have questions, heckle us, whatever you like to do. We are, I would say prepared, but I don't know if we are prepared for that. But
I think we're prepared for the raucous crowd on some
Yes.
level.
all right.
Yeah, and we got Fred Daniel with some greetings and salutations for learned scholars. So people other than Hobbes on this show.
That's right. I'm the lowbrow here.
And then Vanishing Tower Press says, "Get it on, gents."
Man, am I looking at the wrong thing?
Are you looking at YouTube?
I am, but I don't. Nothing's coming across on my screen here.
Uh-oh.
Oh well. Oh, it did when I put something in. Now it popped. Good.
Nice.
I shook her loose with a little hello. All right, so it looks like we got a couple epigraphs, as is Erickson's wont. He started a new book, book 2. So he has an epigraph here, a writing. They both, and then there's going to be one for chapter 5 as well. They're both by a guy named Fisher, which I think we had considered that the person that we meet in the previous chapter will sometimes be the person who gives the epigraph for the next chapter. But I don't think we've met Fisher, have we?
I don't believe we have met Fisher yet.
Yeah, I don't think so. So there goes that idea. I don't remember who came up with it, but you want to read this first one?
Sure. What windfall has brushed our senses, this rocking thunderhead that scraped the lake's placid waters and spun a single day's shadows like a wheel that rolled us from dawn to dusk while we tottered our tender ways? What windless crackles dire warnings, there in the gentle swells that tossed a bobbing cork our way with its fine magenta scent wafting like a panoply of petals that might be ashes in twilight's crimson smear.
So I don't even know what that means. I think by the title, he is maybe giving us a bit of a hint, maybe, of what Fisher is trying to say. The title is Rumor Born. But when I read this, it felt more like time. There was a lot of allusions to a passing of time. What did you think?
Yeah, there's a number of pieces that suggest time and passage of and change and things like that, right? It's all about kind of like movement and change. And there's a lot of great pieces of alliteration, right? Places where there's there's different ways that you can structure poems, and one of them is called alliterative verse, which is where you use, this isn't kind of strict alliterative verse where it's every line has an alliteration between the first half and the second half, but there's a number of places where there's little bits of alliteration or kind of soft alliteration, for lack of a better term. I don't know if there's a technical term for like panoply of petals. Technically, isn't alliteration because it's not the same vowel sound, but it is similar.
I thought there was for consonants when alliteration is consonants and vowels is assonance or something like that. Is that? Am I getting
There's
that
consonants
confused?
and assonants, and then alliteration. But my understanding is that alliteration strictly has to be, or strict alliteration is a consonantal and a vowel sound that match
Oh,
up.
interesting. But it is close, right? I mean,
It is
either
close.
near or
Yeah.
soft, or I wouldn't say turgid in this situation. But I mean, other than that, I don't really know what he's trying to tell us. Like, there's a lot of good imagery for sure.
There's a lot of great imagery.
And I mean, when you do say rumor born, the concept of a bobbing cork makes me think of like, a message in a bottle or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine magenta scent. What does that mean? Magenta scent.
Well,
Like
magenta is a
blood?
color, right?
Yeah, a red.
Yeah.
So is that
Yeah.
blood?
I don't think it's blood. I think it's more of like a flowery
Even,
purple,
okay,
purplish
evening.
red. So yeah, evening definitely, or the whole thing about connecting with the panoply of petals makes me think of like when trees flower and then lose their flowers, right? Flowering trees
More
that bear
time
fruit.
passing.
Yeah, more time passing, and the way that especially like it always associated with like is it in Japan? There's a whole season with cherry blossoms in Japan that it's like the whole there's like just kind of color from all these flower petals floating around on the wind for like a whole week or so.
There is some tension in
Hmm.
lines though, like something foreboding or omenesque
Hmm.
is occurring, prophetic, just
Hmm.
by the way that it's happening. So maybe that's kind of the concept, is that as time passes, a prophecy or something is going to happen, right? Regardless, time can't stop things or makes things happen. I don't know. You got
Well,
anything else
there's an
to add?
interesting
Go ahead.
question. Well, we should read the next epigraph, the chapter 5 epigraph, because it comes from the same text
Poem.
apparently. It's
Yeah.
also rumor born, and we can talk about where we think the two or the three pieces
Mm.
connect to each other.
All right, I'll read this one. And
Yeah.
if this man sees you in his dreams, while you rock in the season's brooding night, neath a tree's stout branch, and your shadow is hooded above the knotted rope, so will the winds of his passing twitch your stiffened limbs into some semblance of running. All right, so definitely hanging a dude here, it seems like.
Yeah. They've got a dude who has been hanged from a tree.
Yeah.
Um,
Which reminds me of Shadow Spawn a little bit with all that, with his mentor being hung, but I don't know.
yeah.
I shouldn't be crossing the streams. I think if we talk about like
No, I think we
other
can
short stories.
we can do a little bit of that. Well, and there's a in in the dream, Kroop's dream, there's a hanged man,
Mm,
right? Later on, or
okay.
a hanged figure. So, but I think my question is do you think that this section, because it apparently also comes from Rumorborn, do you think this follows like directly after, like we're meant to read this as almost like three paragraphs or three stanzas in a single poem, or does it come from some other part of the same text or
I think it
something like
comes from
that?
a different part because
Hmm.
there's something else in between that and this. Because, and if this man, so they're almost
Hmm.
describing someone, it seems like,
Hmm.
or he is Fisher. If that's my thought, would you agree or no?
I think so. It seems like there's a sort of missing, and although that sort of primes us for this kind of idea, right? That almost like we could say that between these two pieces, there's a rumor, and then there's some introduction of a figure, and then we have something related to the figure's presence.
You know what? I got a
Hmm.
question for you. I'm gonna go back a couple. I'm gonna go back into some stuff we recently did. It just occurred to me. But when Tattersail realizes who they're up against, she mentions a poem about Anamander Rake.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that poem is by, I think it's this poem.
You think it's this? I don't think it's this poem.
No?
Because I
You
think
don't?
that's Anamandaris is the name of the poem that when she has the realization about Caladan Brood and Anamander Rake, when they're in the tent with Dujek.
Oh, because do we see, is that another part? Is that also by Fisher, though?
It's possible that it's also by Fisher, but I don't think it is the same poem because I think that one's Anamandaris.
Okay. I'm looking back. I don't really see that it says what the name of the poem is.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't feel the same, that's for sure.
No, it's kind of a different flavor. Although I think what you may be alluding to is that in some ways, perhaps we are being primed for the arrival of Anamander Rake in this book, not even in this chapter, but he seems like the obvious character. He's sort of our biggest, toughest, most dynamic figure within his capacity to wreak havoc in the story in a lot of ways.
Well, especially now that we know that was Erickson's actual character.
And now that we know that was Erickson's character, that's pretty fascinating too. But yes, I think there is something about the idea that that's who we're being primed to recognize the presence of in chapter 2.
The reason I just started laughing is because what if this book, all it really is another one of those instances of a guy wanting to tell everyone about his character. Hey, let me tell you about my D&D character.
There's something to that, you know.
Well, I don't know.
There's a lot of other stuff. In
a lot
story.
of other stuff, right? So anyway, let's get into chapter 5. 907th year in the 3rd millennium, the season of Fandaray in the year of the 5 tusks. 2,000 years since the birth of Darujhistan, the city. I find it interesting that we both pronounce Darujhistan the same.
Mm-hmm.
That's good, right? All right, so this first couple pages is almost 4 or 5 pages, really, is the introduction to Krupp. You say Krupp, I say Krupp.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I see 2 consonants together after a vowel, I usually use the short, but with the E in there, it makes it feel like it should be long. I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, I don't know.
But we could head over to the art gallery.
Mm-hmm.
Here is the image I chose for Krupp. I don't know what you think. There were quite a few. He looks pretty not super special, right? He's eating a pastry, which he loves. Kind of chubby, bald, with a beard and some extra chins. Hey, Crumb. Yes, the year of 5 tusks is upon us. I do love the reckoning or the calendar of Malazan, the Malazan calendar.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty cool. Anyway, you got any thoughts about this picture?
Not necessarily how I pictured him, but I can totally see why the artist chose to portray him this way.
The artist is Jiri Dvorsky. I think this might be some actual Malazan kind of thing that this came from. It's not necessarily like fanfic or something. But.
Yeah, I pictured him looking a little older in some ways, kind of grayer.
I see. Well, I mean, he does have a lot of folds around his eyes.
Yeah.
So.
But but
his beard isn't gray enough, right?
His beard. That's what. Yeah, his beard and his hair is still pretty dark.
Oh, he does have hair. I thought he would be bald. I think he talks about him being bald, to be honest.
Well, he could. There's a lot of range to bald, so
I guess
he doesn't have a whole lot of hair.
I mean, he's only got a 5 head. I'm in the 8 head range.
I guess that's true. That's true.
All right. So, what do you think about Krupp's dream?
I think it's really interesting. We sort of seen several forms of, and the Krupp talks about this to himself. It's kind of a convenient thing for an author to have a character that likes to talk to himself in the third person to
Well, this
tell
isn't
us.
his only one, right?
And this isn't his only one. But it also, I can understand, kind of, it does create kind of an interesting character, and it makes for a unique sequence in a lot of ways. And it helps us, there's kind of a couple layers to this whole scene, I think, in some ways, because we get a lot of detail about Darujhistan, the city, kind of geographically, walking through the different districts and areas and over different bridges and things like that. That if you in this copy, I don't have a map, but in my physical copy sitting over there, I do.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the purpose. This is actually
Yeah.
the introduction to Darujhistan.
Yeah.
Right.
This is a way to sort of say, like, here's kind of about this place and all that sort of stuff. And then there's also, so I really liked this paragraph. For some, the talent they possessed found its channel through a toss of knuckle bones, the reading of heat fractures and scapulae, or the fatid of the deck of dragons. For Krupp, he had no need of any such affectations. The power of divination was in his head, and he could not deny it, no matter how hard he tried. Within the walls of his skull rang the dirge of prophecy, and it echoed through his bones.
Which seems kind of, I don't know, foreboding for such a silly kind of feeling character.
Yep.
In some ways.
Definitely has some foreboding. I liked the idea that we see that the deck of dragons sounds like almost a technology, if that makes sense, in the way that they're sort of kind of more primitive versions of divination, and the deck of dragons is like a development within the process of divining. That seems like a cool thing, and a way to kind of layer history into your magic almost, right? That like knuckle bones and the reading of heat fractures and scapulae, that's I know that was common, especially in like ancient China, that they would take animal shoulder blades and superheat them, and the way they cracked has to do with the way that things were supposed to be occurring.
That's cool. I mean, I've used knuckle bones. I mean, I've used tarot-like decks, but I can't say I've ever done this heat fractures and scapulae, but that would be a cool thing to add to your game. Like,
oh, yeah. Yeah.
And people would probably, like, I didn't know that. I didn't even know what the hell he was talking about in here. But it's cool that you do, and just to add that in, like, having characters see that, from a tower's window or being up on some kind of mezzanine or something, and seeing cloaked figures heating this with magic maybe, or even if you wanted to make it more technological, because it feels kind of more technological to me. It could be the sun streaming through a lens that's heating it up somehow, or something.
Yeah.
Be pretty cool, like a magnifying glass that's heating up this thing, and then the guys, and it cracks. I don't know. Kind of cool.
I also know to talk about one of the examples that's not used is turtle shells was one of the things, that similar process to use a turtle shell and heat it up in a fire and see the way it cracks, which you could probably create something really a fascinating piece of imagery. Have like a brazier with a turtle shell lid that starts to crack, and the firelight seeping out and reading the runes and the cracks and stuff. That would make a really good image.
Yeah, or how the light plays on the ceiling from that.
Yeah.
So, and that would give you kind of Aristotle's cave feeling. I don't know. I'm getting crazy, aren't I?
You're getting very crazy.
Was that Socrates' anyway, not Aristotle? Right.
It's normally called Plato's Cave, although it's Socrates
who
Socrates tells the story, but it's Plato who wrote it down. So
yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
See, I got confused with my old philosophers. Anyway, so to me, this reminds me kind of the trippy stuff that we read in the HoloLand a little bit. It's obviously a little trippy. It's a dream sequence. You don't necessarily know what the hell is going on. My first thought is that, yes, he's just doing another way of just kind of giving us a feel of Darujhistan, the city. But then, like you said, he finds Like, why does he go to an inn in his dream? Why does he see on the crossroads a broad, bare-limbed tree with something long and wrapped in a burlap sack creaking in the wind? And then it gets even weirder, right? When he comes into the place.
Mm-hmm. And he starts talking, and there's what, six beggars is what he describes them as.
Yeah.
And so who do we think these people are?
Who do I? Well, I
Who do you
mean,
think?
in the end, he kind of says who they are, right? What he thinks who they are, anyway. I don't know. I think it's interesting the way he talks through them. But there's more stuff like about Opan's coin. This is definitely a huge plot point that's flipping through here. I don't know. Humility seems kind of silly. I have no idea. Like I say, sometimes in these trippy parts, I kind of my eyes glaze over a little bit, and I'm just like.
So I thought it's not necessarily certain, but I kind of suspected that this might be Whiskey Jack's and his squad of bridge burners, the ones that remain on some level.
Really? The
six beggars sitting in the inn are the foreboding coming of a squad of Malazan soldiers who will be, they're on their way to Darujhistan, but they're not within it yet.
Oh, so you don't think they're corrupt subconscious in any way then?
No, I think they sort of are corrupt subconscious also.
The divinity
he sort of
part,
has
right?
one reading of it, and then it also kind of ties into the larger story that we've been hearing about, right?
Maybe.
That it's, Whiskey Jack and Fiddler and Quick Ben and Callum and the rest of them.
Maybe. I never even considered that. All right, but that isn't the end, right?
But that isn't the end. No.
There is an interesting portion of this that I have looked over most of the time, is this concept right after. I don't even know what this is. Or the next thing is. The next thing is basically the introduction to Crocus. But in the beginning of it, right after this scene with whoever these beggars are, but it's not even over because it says he's going to climb further up the hill. But then we get some more description of Darujhistan and this concept that I read over the first time I read this, for sure, of this idea that underneath Darujhistan there's hollow shafts with that feeds basically methane gas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that lights the city with this endless stream of methane gas.
Yeah. They've got like gas lamp technology in Darujhistan, it sounds like.
Yeah, but I don't think it's like that. I don't think it's because gas light technology it's made or something. I guess it wasn't like just unknown methane gas filtered from the earth, right? Or is that what it is?
No, so no, I think there's a difference there, and there's a suggestion that Darujhistan might have been like founded based on the caves of gas beneath it, almost like somebody had been living there even before.
The gray faces is like
the gray faces,
silent men and women who move beneath the city's cobbled streets for 900 years. Had fed at least one of the city's districts, though fires and gouts of flame reached 100 feet. The gray faces held on. So it is I don't even really think about this most of the time for whatever reason. I just it's only 5 or 6 paragraphs, and they don't necessarily talk about it a lot, right? He just kind of explains it, but it's a super cool thing to bring into a game. Like I know Brett from Gaming and BS, his Avalon has like these mythical faction characters called the Lamplighters that he uses that is like some kind of faction, silent, or not necessarily silent, but they definitely have an aura of mystery and obfuscation about them. And does that make you feel like London in some ways because of the gas lamps? Because I think most people, that's what you'd think of in that era, right? Or not at all?
I think so. I feel like there is some London to Darujhistan. Because there's also this whole thing about the rooftops of Darujhistan presented flat tops, arched gables, coned towers, belfries, and platforms crowded in such chaotic profusion as to leave all but the major streets forever hidden from the sun. And that feels like a very modern thing to me. That I mean, obviously, ancient cities were cramped too, but the idea of building kind of up so tall and so dense that there's that the streets are always in shadow feels more modern than a lot of medieval cities to me.
Yeah, and yeah, that concept of just having that mist all over. It's perfect for what Darujhistan sort of is, like a thief city, which we kind of learn about as when we are introduced here to Crocus, as he gets pretty fairly in depth in how Crocus steals himself into the Darl estate, and
Yeah, it feels sort of like, I don't know if Crocus was anybody's character, but it feels sort of like a sequence where a GM is asking, well, how do you do all this stuff? And the players
they're
like,
old school players,
well,
right?
I put some, tar on the tips of my moccasins so that I can have some grip on the walls as I climb around and things like that, right? That sort of inventive, how do you actually do this stuff element definitely feels present here to me.
And I think you're right. That is a cool example of a process that you could use to, talk your way through. You could use the stuff that he uses. And I think, like, if you look at the Thieves Handbook from second edition D&D back in the day, there's a lot of that stuff in there, right? So, well, I mean, I don't know if
Well,
you've
there's a
actually seen
whole
it, but
like half of a paragraph that is basically all of the shit that he's carrying
the thieves'
that might be
tools.
useful. Yeah, the thieves' tools.
Yeah,
And
it's
what
his
the
thieves'
thieves' tools
tools.
are, and it's not just like, and he was carrying thieves' tools. He's carrying a file and he's carrying gum and some tallow and fishing string and a couple of knives and coils of copper wire and metal saws and all of this stuff that he is hauling around with him to do thievery stuff. He doesn't
Pretty
seem to have
interesting.
any lockpicks listed, though, which I thought was funny.
Yeah, that is interesting. But he does pick a lock, I think,
He does
doesn't
pick
he?
a lock eventually, but that I don't know if maybe that's the sort of thing that we're going to learn is so common in Darujhistan that everybody just carries a lockpick with them because it's such a thief city.
So this guy's name is Crocus. So
Crocus, yep.
let's head over to the art gallery and see if we have an image of Crocus. All right, so let's get rid of. You know what? I think I looked for one, but I didn't find one. So we're stuck with Krupp. Still stuck with Krupp, guys. That's
Stuck
it.
with Krupp.
No image for Crocus. I didn't like any of them, to be honest, because he's called Crocus Younghand or something. I think we realized later. But so anyway, we basically see he's in the process of robbing this house.
Yeah, so his plan is to go in to the youngest Darl daughter has been a sort of debutante and is receiving all sorts of gifts. And Crocus's plan is to go into her room and steal all her jewelry, basically.
Yeah, and with the concept of that, it really gives you more feeling of like when it reminds me a little bit of what was that show from about London that just kind of came out last year on Netflix or earlier this year, maybe everyone was watching about how the young women, when they came of age, they were paraded around and the queen got to choose. And you know what I'm talking about?
I have no idea.
Downton Abbey was, a few years ago, but then last year a new one came out that everyone was all of Bedfordshire. I can't think of what it's called. Anyway, it kind of reminds me of that. And it also gives me the feeling of a kind of a mix between newly industrial London and like Musketeer type era, just because of all the political stuff going on in Darujhistan, which we haven't really gotten to yet. But I think we realize fairly quickly that it's quite a bit, because now we meet Tallow Crafar just in time to basically, I think, to let us know that an assassin war has begun. And now we don't hear of a thieves guild specifically, but we do hear of an assassins guild, which has clan leaders and a guild master. So kind of interesting. And they use crossbows.
And they use crossbows, and they all use crossbows, right?
Yes,
And
yeah.
and he immediately knows that it's an assassin who shot it, right? So
Because of
Tallow,
a crossbow.
yeah, Tallow gets shot, and apparently the bolt goes through his shoulder, which I the bolt must have been quite well propelled, because my impression was that bolts and arrows mostly stuck in people.
Really?
Yeah,
I don't know. I suppose it matters where it hits.
Well, because bullets are smaller than arrows generally,
but not
right?
when they go out. Because
What do you mean?
bullets usually are soft on the end, so they mushroom, and so they make a way bigger hole when they go out than when they go in. Where a crossbow bolt is not going to mushroom. So,
but a crossbow bolt, right, is a lot longer. So that's my point. Is that it seems like it's a lot more likely to get stuck in you than like a bullet, which might actually pass through.
Yeah, I don't know. Kind of interesting, though.
Yeah.
It laid on the tarred tiles a few feet away.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of more interesting imagery. But it's kind of like, I mean, is this... Sometimes I ask myself now, because I guess we're kind of critiquing as we do a slow reading or a deep dive. A lot of this stuff feels like, what was the first book? Was it really just a prologue to Darujhistan, kind of? And could it have been written in that way, like a quick info dump, of 20 pages instead of the 130 it took to get here? I don't really know. I think that's one of the critiques of the series in general is the necessity. But I mean, we've already talked about how many interesting things happened before that is foreshadowing future books or giving you, preparing you for later things. And I mean, to me, the depth of it is what I love. This feeling of, I know all these things are going on, but I don't yet know what those things are is, a huge draw for me. So,
but I think there is some truth. Like I think I mentioned before, Gene Wolfe seems an interesting comparison, because a lot of his books are very dense and take a lot from the reader to put all the stuff together. But he often kind of cleverly chooses what you realize as you kind of go back to it is a fairly kind of a sort of traditional narrative structure on some level that, like, you can see when you look back, like, oh, this is how Severian is going through what feels like the hero's journey that I didn't notice at the time. Whereas this Malazan Book of the Fallen, I think, moves away from a lot of that. And that's one of the ways that it is actually harder in a lot of ways, because it doesn't rely upon that structure, or doesn't kind of subtly, because in the Gene Wolfe books, it's very subtle the way that you kind of get primed up for all these different things to realize the various things that he wants you to realize when he wants you to realize them. Whereas in Malazan Book of the Fallen, it seems like there's a sort of abandonment of, like, a sort of, there's no kind of single, like, here's our protagonist and they're going through a hero's journey and all that sort of stuff, right? We had a little bit of that with Ganos Peron, maybe, in that he's kind of a young character who's going through all of his, trying to grow up and become somebody in the world and all that sort of stuff. But then he dies. He comes back, but, doesn't really make for a very good hero's journey when your protagonist dies,
But is Crocus that hero's journey?
A little bit too. But again, I think that's my point, is that there's no kind of like
single
central
protagonist
narrative to kind of hang the whole story on. In some ways, it's too winding and separated out, right?
It's just way bigger.
Yeah. It's sort of like the difference between, like, a river and, like, a river delta, where there's all these little kind of small streams, and there's sort of just kind of a layer of stuff that you have to work your way through, rather than kind of a single current.
And I mean, I guess the final question that eventually we'll answer is it worth it? Is the delta worth the river? Is the river better, or the delta, or are both of them okay, or what?
Well, I will say there are not a whole lot of deltas in literature, which makes this something special at the same time as it makes it kind of a unique challenge, right?
Yeah. So this, like, there's basically what we're seeing is two scenes that are lengthy in the beginning, and then they shorten as these scenes kind of merge or come together, which is kind of an interesting tool that he used here. Basically between Tallow and Crocus.
Yeah. Yeah, they go through their whole. So Crocus is trying to steal, and he gets inside and starts grabbing stuff. And Tallow has his kind of realization that he's been shot and decides to get a vantage point. And then we get back to Crocus, and we have sort of a shorter section, and then it goes back to Tallow, and we have a shorter section, and we kind of gradually get sort of shorter and shorter pieces as their narratives come together until Tallow is killed and we don't have any more of him.
But there is an important part about Tallow's killer is this idea of magic being used. A purse of power fraying the fabric of night like a finger poking through rotted cloth. And through the rent, something had come. Pretty interesting.
There's some other, so like Crocus, when he sees the assassin, or the second tier assassin, I guess we might call because Tallow is an assassin himself. He says, "Oh, Maori or Mori," which I thought was funny because that's sort of a deity that we haven't heard about, and a suggestion that maybe the Darujhistani people have like a whole different set of deities that they maybe syncretize with the Malazan ones. But we've heard about like Hood and Shedinol.
Yep. In K-Roll, apparently, right?
Yeah, and Carol.
Oh, no, I guess not yet. Maybe we haven't met K-Roll yet, or have we? No, I don't think we have, because we haven't got back to Krupp.
Yeah.
In his dream. Okay, yeah, you're right. But yeah, so there's a few of them, and I do think that we can believe that the different cultures definitely do have different pantheons that they worship. So we got it. You want to read Crumb's
Yeah,
comment?
the underworld depth and rogue assassin content reminds me a little of 2E also, as well as Blades in the Dark or Band of Blades RPG. Great texture for this setting. Yeah, Crumb, there's a lot of, especially I think Blades in the Dark is kind of an interesting one, because Blades in the Dark actually is set in a sort of semi-industrial fantasy world, like we've been talking about with this sort of question about kind of what is Darujhistan actually like, and are sort of wondering about, is it more of sort of like a classic fantasy city, or is it more like kind of Gaslight London, or is it more like these other things?
What's China Melville? What's China Melville's city?
In the trilogy?
Yeah.
I can't remember the name.
Darujhistan kind of reminds me of that as well.
Yeah, there's some of that too, and that's
which is taken from those other things that you've mentioned. So
yeah, and yeah,
yeah.
I was gonna say China Mieville's an interesting one because his I don't know how much you know about his politics, Hobbs. He's very left leaning and really interested in the idea of the kind of translation from medieval to modernity and like Marxism and all of that sort of stuff. And so it always seems to me that his kind of interest in industrialism and modernity and all of that sort of stuff in his fantasy has to do with kind of trying to create a space for that kind of political element in a way that like Tolkien's kind of deliberate anachronism almost denies that, right? Tolkien's world only really allows for like feudalism and monarchism, whereas China Mieville's kind of industrialized fantasy allows for, workers of the world to unite and that sort of stuff. Which is something interesting about Malazan, because Malazan doesn't really do either of those very strongly. It has bits of.
Yeah, I mean, there's like one book later that's very strong, in my opinion, about capitalism.
Yeah,
but,
later on.
Yeah,
but
not
certainly
in this
from
book.
what we've seen.
Yeah, we don't really see that in this book for sure, I don't think. And I mean, there's quite a few pages of this tense intensity as Crocus seems to go through a building where he runs into his uncle. and he does see. He doesn't even name what it is, but I do have Uncle Mammoth here in the art gallery and I'm keeping these images because I figure we might as well jump back to them once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pretty interesting version, I thought. Oh, my mouse is not happy here for some reason. Oh, it doesn't help to do that. There we go.
And on Uncle Mammoth's shoulder is a small winged monkey.
Yeah, this looks.
And what's up with that? I can't see it yet because it hasn't loaded on the street.
On YouTube.
I will.
So this is a very kind of menacing image of Uncle Mammoth, in my opinion, compared to what I would normally think of him as. And the Baccarol, which is this winged monkey, looks more like a homunculus in this situation than, or like a quasit than I would expect.
Yeah, it just popped up for me, and I definitely agree. That looks a lot. I was picturing something more like
soft and fuzzy. Oh wait, no, what?
Fuzzy.
Yeah, is this might actually be Baruch actually. Yes,
well,
this is Baruch. Yeah, sorry, my bad. But see, it has him with a quasit or something too. But anyway, so I jumped the gun. I was so excited to show some more pictures when I haven't even met this guy yet. Back to the book. Oh my God. Anyway, so he jumps through, and he seems to do a pretty good job. But I think there's definitely this coin helping him, like by almost giving his pursuers bad luck or something.
Yeah, he first dodges a crossbow bolt by dropping down to get the coin, and then he's got it like not in like the main pouch, but in a pocket somewhere, and it keeps like rubbing against him or something and kind of twisting him a little bit.
Getting hot.
It seems like getting hot. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we kind of go through this different scenes of him getting away, and then we see the ramshackle Phoenix Inn, where these two are watching the Phoenix Inn that Crocus fled into, and they basically say, an ascendant meddled, too cautious to show itself fully, however. Unfortunate, it's been years since I last killed an ascendant. So another kind of bum, 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 the plot thickens kind of deal, like, who are these dudes? And then we shift into chapter 6. So we got through one chapter. It only took about 45 minutes. Yeah. Surely we can do 3 more chapters in half an hour.
Exactly.
All right. Your turn, man. Read this out.
All right. Chapter 6. So this is a fragment from Cabal by Puddle. There's a cabal breathing deeper than the bellows, drawing up the emerald fires beneath the rain-glistened cobbles. While you may hear the groaning from the caverns below, the whisper of sorcery is less than the dying sigh of a thief stumbling unwilling into Darujhistan's secret web.
So more talk about how, this methane gas that exists beneath Darujhistan. And this looks like a poem from quite a while ago. And right in it, the thieves of Darujhistan and their secrets seem to be a pretty common thing. Do you have any other thoughts on this? Rain glistened, maybe makes you think of London again.
Rain glistened cobbles and the emerald fires. It's an interesting kind of thing. I like the idea the whisper of sorcery is less than a dying sigh, because we've seen so much of sorcery be kind of big and powerful and aggressive, and this idea of sorcery as something, and this chapter I think is one of the places where we see sorcery as much more of like a workplace tool that is pretty subtle, right? Like Crone breaks through the window and what's his name? Who you just showed,
Baruch.
who's Baruch just like snaps his fingers and repairs it, like a mending spell that he just had ready or something. And things like that happen in this chapter in a lot of ways that I thought was interesting.
This chapter does not start with like him telling us when this is. So it's almost like at the same time, we can assume, right?
Yeah.
And we get to meet Crone, the great Crone, who has lived for thousands of years, basically on the shattered peaks of moon spawn, and she has a mission.
Mm-hmm.
So we just see that really briefly. It's just like a short introduction to the great ravens. We learn that magic is their ambrosia, drawn to it by the scent of blood and power, and within its aura, their lifespans lengthened into centuries. Pretty interesting. And they can see magic, apparently. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. The great
Well,
ravens.
that's another talking about kind of blending mythology with your game, right? Using ravens, right? Ravens as like Odin's messengers are a big thing in Norse mythology, but more generally, I think the idea of having like intelligent animals not played kind of whimsically, or it's not like Harry Potter or the Wizard of Oz or anything like that. It's like this is a seriously powerful being we find out who is very ancient, very intelligent, and has a job to do, despite the fact that it is a talking raven, basically.
Yeah.
And that's something I think that's interesting in terms of trying to kind of control the flavor for Erickson, controlling the flavor of his narrative, and something that you could take into your game, controlling the flavor of your wild high magic game that has talking ravens, trying to make sure that they all come across as like, no, these are real NPCs. This is not a joke. This is a talking raven who has a job to do.
This ain't no whimsy, brother. This is
exactly. And we all know how Hobbes feels about whimsy. So
so yeah, it doesn't feel whimsical at all to me. The great raven crone seems, and like she leads the others, their restless brothers and sister called out to her as she passed, "Do we fly?" Like she is the ruler of the great ravens. So enormous wings. So we don't know really how big this raven is, but it sounds pretty big. So it's just a short little introduction to Crone, and that she's going somewhere. Then we head into the next scene, which deals with a spy, circle breaker. So like somebody key that music, dun dun dun. That wasn't it. Dun dun dun. That one. I'm thinking of the Spy Hunter game. That's what I was trying to think of.
Oh.
Sorry.
I thought you were trying to do the James Bond theme.
That I was that too. I'm just not very musically inclined. I'm not good at it.
And we obviously, everybody on YouTube and Twitch knows why we can't play the actual James Bond theme.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So what do you think about this scene with Circle Breaker and Turban Ore?
So part of me kind of likes this because it fits into the same sort of thing as like that sort of the scene with the two kind of Malazan guards earlier that we saw, where it's just like we have a sort of NPC who we wouldn't normally focus on, but who has kind of something interesting to say, and it's a little bit of flavor. The other part of me feels like this is exactly why people bounce off of Malazan. Like this little section of the chapter, there's so many proper nouns, and there's a whole like description of here's how the city is laid out that feels so much like, Erickson, why don't you just give us a map that we can look at instead of trying to describe all this stuff? And obviously in print copies, there often is a map. And I assume that he is perhaps expecting you to flip back and forth between the map and this description of the city. But there's, at the intersection of Old King's Walk and View Street rose a flat-topped hill, which we'll find out is High Gallows Hill, on which sat Majesty Hall, where each day the council gathered. A narrow park encircled the hill and all of that. Near High Gallows Hill stood a massive rough-hewn stone gate, the last surviving remnant of the castle that once commanded Majesty Hill. In the days of kings that had long since ended in Darujhistan, the gate known as Despot's Barbican stood stark and unadorned, the lattice of cracks of fading stripped of past tyranny. That's so many proper nouns that are interesting, and they definitely kind of create a flavor, but I don't know. My question is sort of, as with a number of sequences, it sort of feels like almost like the catalog of ships in Homer, the way that you're not really expected to recognize.
I don't think you are.
Yeah, you're just sort of supposed to kind of take in the flavor.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, in the beginning of Dune, Frank Herbert describes tons of different houses and different planets and all that, but you don't have to know those things.
No, but I think people who bounce off Malazan is because they're coming in expecting that they're going to be told the important
These things
stuff,
are
not the other
important.
stuff.
Yeah,
And
but
they very quickly, get in over their head trying to
on
capture all
third
this.
or fourth reading, you can actually realize that High Gallows Hill, Majesty Hill, Carol's Hill, all those things actually
Mhm.
mean something, and they do have some importance.
Yeah.
Like a game does. Like when you're looking at the map, those things do have importance. But to describe them in a book, I don't know, how important
Mhm.
it is. I think a lot of Malazan and Garden of the Moon is you just kind of enjoy it as you go by it and let it sit there and then hope it'll make sense later. And if it doesn't, then just discard it. It's not
Yeah.
like you have to know it to really get the feeling of what's happening. I don't think anyway.
No, I agree, and I was just sort of making a point that I think this is sort of a great little example of the sort of stuff that people who bounce off this series bounce off of, because it's got all the little pieces that make up the.
I also
Yeah.
kind of feel like this tiny little scene is almost written like I think Circle Breaker's mind works.
Mm-hmm.
Like it feels like the style of writing even feels a little different,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is kind of interesting. It is dry and very data driven, which makes me kind of feel like this circle breaker guy is on the spectrum a little bit and can super focus on this stuff, and not necessarily have like all the other emotions that we see other emotions later. But right here, this introduction to circle breaker and urban and turban ore
Mm-hmm.
just feels different. Like we learn he's a councilman. And other than that, and that Circle Breaker is a spy who's basically taken it upon himself to keep an eye on Turban Ore. That's pretty much all we need to know at this point, I think.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So,
there's kind of little bits of flavor that I like. The
oh yeah,
silver pommel of a dueling sword, because we've all met kind of military swords so far, but the idea that there's a sort of that the rich people carry dueling swords in this city kind of goes back to what you were saying about like the sort of Three Musketeers feel of
mm-hmm.
Darujhistan.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now we move on to Baruch, but we don't
Mm-hmm.
just get a simple introduction to Baruch. He is actually reading information from Circle Breaker, the guy we just saw,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of cool. I mean, it just kind of flits over to the scene and we don't even like see, like a lot of times he'll pull back the camera and kind of explain where the person is in relation to the other people. But we don't even see that. We just basically see, boom, right now he's just looking at it, right? We don't even see this pan in as you kind of figure out where he is in relation to the other people or anything. You
Mm-hmm.
just see him, and then we learn, that there's somebody named the Eel, and
Mm-hmm.
we don't get the impression that Eel is part of the Assassins Guild or anything like that. I don't know. It's just kind of interesting, and it almost seems like a throwaway scene a little bit, just to basically introduce you to Baruch, and then the Great Crone or the Great Raven Crone shows up.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the message is, I don't know, Lord Rake wishes to meet with Baruch because Baruch is a badass, right?
Because Baruch is sort of secretly running the show.
Right.
He's the best mage around, and he sort of lets the council go and act like they're doing things, and then he's the most important sorcerer, and the sorcerers are the most important people, and
Yeah.
so yeah.
So, what do you think about this after they talk and he accepts the invitation, or he extends an invitation to Rake? This idea that Turban Ore shows up, and Crone wants to accompany Baruch as they go to meet with him, and he allows it.
Mhm.
I mean, does that seem a little weird?
Seems a little odd. Um, Although I imagine there's an element of, right, if you were a real person in this world, even if you were a very powerful mage, you'd have a sense of like what sort of really powerful stuff existed, and how, Baruch doesn't seem like he's got a sense for scheming, certainly. He's not the best schemer that we see around, but it seems to me almost like he might be kind of aware of the way that the encounter with Turban Orr is going to go, knowing Turban Orr's character, and is kind of trying to align himself with Crone and Animander Rake without kind of coming out and saying that yet.
Mm-hmm. And take advice where it can be found, right?
Yeah.
From another powerful entity who apparently can weave a pretty cool illusion.
Yep.
All right, so now we meet Ralik Nam. We leave that, so it's just like character after character all happening pretty much at the same time, which I think is another issue that people have, right?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So there was Baruch, who looks very formidable there. And here is an image I found of Ralik Nam by Zisoze. So thank you for letting us use this image. I didn't ask you, but I definitely want to let you know that I did. So there's the crossbow, and otherwise he just looks like a young dude. I mean, I think there's some forbidding ones and darkness and all that, but I kind of wanted one where we could maybe see his features a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, so it looks like this next scene is about Ralik and kind of talks about another plot that we didn't even necessarily know about until now with this Lady Simtal.
Lady Simtal and Councilman Lim.
Yeah, we didn't even know what was going on, and he is basically ready to assassinate Lady Simtal for personal reasons. That is not a contract. The guild had no part in this. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting for us to know at this point. But then we shift back to Baruch's room as he is ready to pull the trigger on the crossbow and kill Lady Simtal. So back here we find out that basically Councilman Turban is trying to what?
So Councilman Turban Orr wants Baruch, because he knows that Baruch is basically an important figure. He doesn't really recognize just how important Baruch is. But he wants Baruch to basically agree to support the council in declaring Darujhistan neutral rather than part of the Free Cities Alliance versus the Malazan Empire. Because Turban Orr seems to think that that will protect Darujhistan. And Baruch basically tells him that's bullshit. The Malazans are going to come either way. And, you know,
they always take their pound of flesh, basically.
Yep. And they're gonna wreak havoc. And if you just let them in, they're gonna have an even easier time of it, basically.
Yeah, and it's pretty obvious that to me anyway, Turban Orr doesn't really care about Darujhistan. He cares about Turban Orr.
Yep.
So that's pretty obvious. All right, back to Ralik Nam, where I think he is affected by Opan.
Yep.
The spinning coin that all of a sudden delivers some sort of crazy plan, and he basically kills Lim instead.
Yep. And as we connect the dots, right, this is important for Turban Orr's plan, because Turban Orr says they had one vote. They were going to win by one vote, basically. And Lim is on his side, and Ralik Nam kills him. And so they're not going to be able to declare Darujhistan neutral. And so it turns out that Turban Orr was overconfident, essentially. And that's sort of, I think that's where, speaking about what turns people off from Malazan, this is, I think, what makes people really excited to read Malazan, is the way that these kind of different plot threads that were presented separately, when you piece it all together and are like, oh man, Opan just sort of intervene or chance intervene in this really wonderful way to twist everything that's going on in the city right now. That's really cool, right? When you piece it together.
It gives you that idea of what you can make things happen by just affecting one simple choice by Nam instead of killing Simtal and doing his vendetta. He kills Lim instead, and now, a whole different plot happens.
Yeah, yeah.
Schrodinger or something, right? When you pull the one to the other ones exist, or I don't know. I'm getting off. Anyway, we also meet clan leader Ocelot and kind of explains that there certainly is an assassin's war happening, but it's not the guild against itself. And they don't even know who they're up against.
Yeah.
But we have heard in the past, I think the feeling is that it's the
Rallic sort of
Malazans.
says it's the Malazans, it's the Empire, the Claw, and Ocelot sort of says maybe, but we're not sure. And then there's sort of the impression Ocelot is kind of using Rallic, has told Rallic to use Rallic against whoever it is.
To try and find out. Yeah, because I think we've heard in the past that normally they actually hire local talent to kill the Claw and the local talent, even to kill the wizards in a town. That's like part of their MO.
Yeah. Makes perfect sense that's how you would, if the wizards are the wizards are sort of your artillery in a high magic world, but they're vulnerable in the way that people are, that artillery pieces aren't sometimes. So
yeah, for sure. All right, so let's finish off this chapter. It seems like we have, I guess it isn't the end of the chapter, but now
let's talk about Animander Rake.
Yes, Rake arrives. So I have chosen an image for Rake. If my mouse, this is like add some tension because my mouse doesn't want to move on this thing. There we go. So look at that. Is this how you would picture Animander Rake?
I can't see it yet.
Oh. So
right.
One of the things I find interesting
came up on Twitch faster.
He's got him gray as opposed to black because his skin is said to be black like obsidian. But white hair. We don't know any dark elves with white hair or anything, do we?
We dark elves don't most of the dark elves have silver or white hair?
Well, Drizzt does, but that's the thing. I don't know if they all do.
I think that most of them do, or at least now most of them do. I think.
Yeah.
But that may have been an invention to make Drizzt seem less like a special snowflake. No, Animander Rake, I did not picture him quite so gray. Definitely picture him kind of darker and
bulkier
a little. Less kind of elven in a lot of ways.
Oh, really? You figure him less elven? The Tistandi, you don't consider them to be elves?
I think there's some sort of well, so when I first read this, I pictured Animander Rake. He's like 7 feet tall and bulky, so I picture him a whole lot more like trying to think of the actor's name.
The Rock.
Sort of like The Rock, except even darker than The Rock, but like, kind of huge and powerful, and this kind of like, kind of Conan musculature with the power to, command magics and stuff.
Yeah. I think this image is way more inspired by Elric, who I think a lot of people connect Animander Rake to.
Yes. Well, we joked about Elric and Geralt of Rivia and Animander Rake and all of those, and Drizzt in some ways too.
Yes.
Even though he wields two scimitars instead of one
so
big sword.
Geralt.
Geralt also only wields one at a time, right?
That's true.
So, anyway, but yes, I did not picture Animander Rake quite so elven. I pictured him a lot kind of broad and almost stocky, and that to me also kind of goes back to this idea that the Tistandi are really like ancient, and so I picture them almost kind of like Neanderthal-like on some level.
Interesting.
Because they're so ancient.
But I don't think they were ever humans, nor Neanderthals.
No, but the idea, because that's the way my brain kind of works in terms of like evolution and stuff. That like that modern humans, for lack of a better term, in Malazan Book of the Fallen would look kind of thinner and cleaner and all that sort of stuff, versus the T-Stand-D would look kind of broad and powerful and hairy.
Well, it's my impression that the T-Stand-D are not human in any way, and they are from somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I don't even apply that to them. I mean, because you see more like Neanderthal characters later in the books.
You do also, yes.
So that's interesting. But I mean, it's all good. Well, let's look back at what that other guy gave us when we compared all of the races.
Mm-hmm.
So you really see the dark T-Stand-D in this image, but he's definitely not bigger. I think this may be the same artist, actually.
I think it looks like the same artist to me. It looks like the same image, but just recolored.
Yeah, which he has him way darker, which is good. But then when you see like the Trell, definitely looks darker.
Yeah,
or looks thicker, like that kind.
Yeah.
So pretty interesting. Pretty interesting stuff. All right, back to the discussion. All right, so one of the cool things in this is that he totally basically casts a darkness spell and just expects Baruch to be able to see in it.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely was an infravision because he can see color, and he basically mentions this concept that the eye colors of the T-Stand-D, or at least Animander Rake, because he's never seen a T-Stand-D before, the eye colors actually can show their mood, which is pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts about this scene?
I mean, the basic idea of I liked the idea that we see a lot about how much the various kind of people of Darujhistan think that Baruch, what's his name? The alchemist. I've already lost it. With
Baruch.
The B. Baruch. Yeah, I just flipped anyway, Baruch. We see how kind of powerful they think he is and how important they think he is. And then he sees Animander Rake and has that sort of same feeling about Animander Rake. And that's, I think, a great way to be like, no, this is who is really, I mean, we've already seen Animander Rake do the blasty magic and all of that sort of stuff. But there's some other clever bits and pieces too, like Animander Rake talking about in the magic fight, how he was the one who dispelled the demons.
Yeah, that whole mystery is kind of solved by him.
And he basically kind of straight up says, that the Malazan High Mage Tashrin attacked his allies, and I dealt with the remnants of that too.
Yeah, and that Tashrin didn't care how many of their men were killed. They didn't care anything about it. They did not even care about that. It wasn't part of their issue. Yes, they wanted to drive them off, but the whole idea, and also we learned that the Pale Wizards basically just fled.
Yeah. Which is always, and that also, I think, sort of ties into, right, Tattersail, every time we saw her, whenever she's sort of faced with danger, she kind of thinks, I could just flee, and then decides, no, I'm going to stay and stick with the bridge burners and do their thing. But the idea we sort of see, if you were a very powerful mage about to witness the destruction of your city and the kind of chaos that would happen, that you could just hop into your warren and go somewhere else. And
let's GTFO.
The problem is that then Animander Rake comes after you with his giant magic sword and is very clear to Baruch that he's just killed, a whole bunch of mages, and there's still a couple left, and if they're around, he's going to kill them too.
Yeah, and part of the alliance is their heads. Yeah,
and he's super, and I really like that about the different kind of characters in Malazan, and particularly Animander Rake, that he's so kind of matter-of-fact about his power. There's something really kind of fascinating about this character that's just like, I'm a huge, super badass mage swordsman who can do all these different things, and I'm gonna, take what's mine.
Yeah, I really like.
But he is not kind of invincible, right? He talks about Moonspawn is like badly hurt, and
my city. It was our city, so I had to protect it. So I had to leave. I really like this concept of when Rake first appears, whether it's like through a warren or teleportation or whatever. Suddenly the walls around him groaned and Baruch gasped as an enormous weight seemed to press down on him. The blood pounded in his head, lancing him with pain. He gripped the edge of the map table to steady himself. The incandescent globes of light suspended from the ceiling dimmed, then flickered out in the darkness. The alchemist heard cracks sweeping down the walls as if a giant's hand had descended on the building. All at once, the pressure vanished. Baruch raised a shaking hand to his sweat-slicked brow. So, I mean, definitely this feeling power has arrived. And that's pretty cool. One thing that I felt was kind of weird is that Rake is sort of flippant at first. Like, he's just a friendly, regular guy. Was Crone, was she modest? She's never been, was she dramatic? Was she her melodramatic self? And just kind of puts him at ease. Is that like his charisma trying to work? But then when he starts talking about the Empress and the Wizards of Pale, he's just like, no, I executed them. I am judge, jury, and executor as far as that goes. Executioner, I guess I should say it. Executor is a different word, isn't it?
Although you could have like the executor could be an executioner. But no, I think there is something interesting, and that to me felt sort of like knowing that Anamander Rake is a player character that there's often with player characters is sort of sizing up of a conversation right before you kind of get to the meat of it. That unless you're like, here's exactly what we need, what's it going to cost type thing. Generally, what I find with players is that when they want something from an NPC and they don't think they're necessarily going to get it outright, they sort of try to size up the NPC. And part of that also is with player characters, there's always a sense of, could I take this guy if it came to blows? Because that's always a recourse that players seem to have. I don't know that that's the cause of this, although it seems easy to read that into it. But also maybe that's just kind of Rake's character, is that he's who knows how often he gets to talk to people. That's sort of one of my questions. Because his city is like abandoned mostly, except for
women and children.
And all of his kind of warrior buddies are out with Caladan Brood fighting, and all of his mages and kind of like everybody that he, aside from the Ravens, everybody that he would work with and all that sort of stuff, that maybe he's just lonely, which is kind of an interesting concept too.
As old as he is, I don't know if that would be it. I don't know. I think he's just he just kind of has an alien feel about him maybe, but he's learned a little bit about humanity and tries to show that. I don't know for sure. All right. Yeah. Anyway, that was like our second vision of Anamander Rake. And I don't necessarily think that all the scenes Rake is in were actually scenes that happened at a table. I think they played the campaign and then he tried to tell it in a way, like, who knows what Anamander Rake, like some of the
Anamander Rake now, Erickson.
Some of that, I think so, but
so who knows?
All right. Well, let's move on. I think we got one more scene to take care of to finish up chapter 6. I'd like to get that done.
Yeah.
All right. So basically we find ourselves in the Phoenix Inn and we get to meet like kind of this group of plotters that even are like player characters because they plot against themselves, right? Because they don't tell everyone everything. So let's get rid of this and we can show these guys races. So now this is where we meet Rallick. We've already met Rallick. Like I said, I don't have a picture of Crocus, but I do have a picture of Murillo. So this is an interesting version of him, I thought. This is by Dejan Delic. So thanks for that. But these guys we see quite a bit of later are Murillo, Crocus, Krupp, and Rallick Nam, and then their buddy Kal. And the Phoenix Inn seems to be like their place of hanging out. And they seem to be playing a card game. We get to see more of Krupp being kind of a doofus, I guess. But what do you think about this? Anything?
I don't know. I like the idea. There was a mention that I think it's Rallick Nam who comes in last, and he says, is this the same as like the same game as the last two nights. Some sense of like the way that people who play cards with each other a lot. I played a lot of cards with my friends in high school because that's sort of what we did at lunch. And there's a character in which case it just sort of constantly goes on and on and on, and it's just sort of like, you know, you're sitting there talking and playing and not really thinking about either very much, and it just sort of happens. And yeah, I liked that idea that felt very real to me, that as a way to kind of suggest that this is what they do. Like every night they sit and they play cards, and they don't play very much of any one game because Krupp never takes his turn, and they're all mad about that. And we can all appreciate that as gamers. The character wants to talk instead of taking his turn.
I actually want to do this story in character, but I want to tell the whole story.
I want to tell all the details, all the lurid detail, you know, all of that sort of stuff.
Who does lurid detail?
Who does lurid detail? I don't know. But
so yeah, I mean, do we have anything else that we want to mention other than that? Basically, I think this is our full introduction to this group.
It's our introduction. Well, we also have Salty,
the bartender or the owner of Phoenix Inn.
The bartender, right? Or the owner, who seems like she's not really a part of their group, but she's like a friend of all of them, and she, you know, bashes Krupp over the head with a loaf of bread, which is kind of a funny bit. But yeah, I thought that was especially since he's sort of talking about, he's, I think, really a fascinating character in that whole scene, because he's telling all these stories and he's talking about his magic powers, and then he doesn't really do anything, and they're all just like, oh, you're full of shit, old man, take your turn in your game because we're trying to play. And he just wants to tell these weird stories that they all know is not true, or maybe they have like a bit of truth to them or something. That seemed like a really interesting character to me.
Yeah, he is interesting, and I do think there's other characters like Krupp in Gardens of the Moon and Malazan Book of the Fallen that definitely are fun. And like you say, they give you this opportunity of maybe a bit of humor or Jar Jar Binks-ish stuff. But we also see like he's a diviner. We already know that as the audience, but we don't think these guys know that. So we do know he has some abilities of some sort, or we just like to watch his dreams for some reason.
Yeah. And who knows what they mean, and who all the characters are. The beggars that he breaks bread with, the 6 of them.
Yeah. All right. So I was thinking today, I think that'll wrap up the book itself. So let's move into the epilogue for the session. What do we think about Darujhistan so far? Any thoughts briefly?
It's a good thing that there's a map included in the book.
Well, does the map really matter?
I don't know. I don't know how much the map actually matters. I think often that it's more about, in most cases, especially with these stories, I think it's more about kind of like the feel of the place than necessarily being able to plot like where they go on the map and all that sort of stuff.
Which we've talked about quite a bit already, is just this kind of feeling of a large city with gas lights and magic and fog and rain. You know, it definitely has this kind of feeling of Jack the Ripper's London to me, which is kind of that.
Jack the Ripper's London. There's some feel. It reminds me of Blades in the Dark. Reminds me of Dishonored a little bit. The I can't remember, Dunwall or whatever it's called. The world of the city in that game. That kind of like industrialized fantasy or semi-industrialized fantasy that is sort of grim and gray, but there's also like, it's kind of like more urban fantasy almost, in the sense that it's like, that's what I would say about Darujhistan. Which
I think at some point, I think we should talk about Darujhistan as a character, and then maybe wrap that into how you can use that in your games. Which leads me to next week. We haven't chosen a story. Do we have anything on the schedule?
We do not have anything on the schedule yet. I'm pulling it up right now. What could we do? Do we
want to do the second story of Shadow Spawn being Shadow's Pawn. It's in the second book, though. I don't know if you have the second book.
I don't know if I have the second book either, but I can.
Tales from the Vulgar Unicorn.
Tales from the. Let me check because it will be on my Kindle if I have it. It'll take me just a minute to pull it up. Yeah, I have Tales from the Vulgar Unicorn. Let's do that.
Okay, yeah. So and I think I'm going to try and get the guy that I had last time. I know he has all the books. I'll contact him, and maybe we can get Tim Shorts from Gothridge Manor in here with us, who I know is a pretty big fan of Sanctuary and Thieves World and Shadow Spawn. So I think that's what we'll do next week. And you got any last words? Oh, I think also in the epilogue we should give our digits. Arlen, if someone wants to Darujhistan up.
If someone wants to Darujhistan up, I am at Pelham Wasteland on Twitter. I have my own YouTube channel, Live from Pelham's Wasteland, and my podcast, Live from Pelham's Wasteland, and you can contact me at any of those. Or if you are on the Gamerhood Discord, there's a whole channel dedicated to the Libram Society, and I will see whatever you post, and if you at me, I will definitely see it. But don't at me on Sunday morning because I like to sleep in.
Do it. I do it every Sunday morning that I can. Anyway, I am Jason Hobbs. This was the Libram Society. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Oh, yeah.
I was just saying I'm Arlen Walker.
Right. Yeah, that was the end. I was going to give my digits, but most people know them.
No, you do it.
No, I think it's good.
No, I think you should.
I am at OSRN Hobbs, or you can email me at hnfhobbs@gmail.com. I'll see you in the Gamerhood. And now let's all head over to Kevin Madison's Dungeon Musing for some second edition D&D. TJ, cue the music. All right, we should stall for a second though, because it always seems to take longer to get going.
Okay.
Or maybe we'll just not do the music.